What if I told you that approximately 1 to 2% of the world's population possesses a neurological gift that science is only beginning to fully understand? What if there's a type of human mind that operates like a sophisticated prediction engine combined with an emotional radar system so finely tuned that it can detect the subtle shifts in someone's psychological state before they're even aware of it themselves? What if these individuals don't just feel emotions? They decode them like linguists studying an ancient language. Welcome to an exploration of one of the most misunderstood and underestimated personality types, the INFJ. But this isn't about stereotypes or pop psychology generalizations. This is about the actual neurocognitive machinery that makes these minds different, the biological realities behind their seemingly impossible intuitions, and the genuine scientific explanations for why they operate so differently from the rest of the population. 1. Deconstructing the INFJ architecture. More than just 4 letters. Before we venture into the labyrinthine corridors of the INFJ mind, we need to establish what we're actually talking about. INFJ represents a specific configuration of cognitive preferences: introversion, intuition, feeling, and judgment. But reducing an INFJ to these 4 letters is like describing a symphony by listing its instruments. The true complexity emerges when we examine how these cognitive functions interact, prioritize, and sometimes battle against one another within the neural architecture of the INFJ brain. The INFJ cognitive stack is organized hierarchically, with each function playing a distinct role in how these individuals process reality. At the foundation of everything sits introverted intuition, the dominant function that acts as the primary lens through which INFJs perceive and interpret the world. This isn't intuition in the mystical sense. This is a sophisticated form of pattern recognition that operates largely beneath conscious awareness, constantly comparing present stimuli against an internal database of accumulated experience, psychological understanding, and behavioral knowledge accumulated over years or decades. What makes this particularly fascinating from a neuroscientific perspective is that this processing happens in parallel across multiple cognitive domains simultaneously. While most people process information serially, taking in data, analyzing it, reaching conclusions, INFJs are running what amounts to multi-threaded cognitive processing. They're analyzing verbal content, interpreting nonverbal communication, detecting emotional subtext, recognizing familiar patterns, and generating predictive models about future outcomes all at once. It's as if their brain has built multiple processors working in conjunction rather than sequentially. The second function in the INFJ stack is extroverted thinking. Often misunderstood because it's not the dominant function, yet it plays a crucial organizational role. This function acts as a critical evaluator and organizer. Where introverted intuition generates insights and patterns, extroverted thinking asks penetrating questions about those insights. It demands evidence, consistency, logical coherence, and practical applicability. It's the function that prevents INFJs from floating off into pure abstraction. It grounds their intuitive visions in reality and forces them to account for external constraints and logical contradictions. The third function is introverted feeling, sometimes called the aspirational function in personality theory. This is where values, authenticity, and personal meaning reside. For INFJs, this function doesn't drive decision-making the way many people assume. Instead, it provides the ethical compass and the sense of personal significance that gives direction to all the intuitive insights and logical analysis happening above it. An INFJ without a strong connection to their values is an INFJ running on empty. Finally, there's extroverted sensing, the inferior function that INFJs struggle with most. This function deals with present-moment sensory experience, immediate bodily awareness, and practical hands-on engagement with the physical world. For INFJs, this is often their blind spot. They're so focused on interpreting meaning and predicting future outcomes that they can miss what's directly in front of them. They might not notice they're hungry until they're shaking. They might not realize they're in pain until it's severe. They live partially disconnected from their bodies and the immediate physical environment, which can create practical difficulties. 2. The intuition engine. Reverse engineering the pattern recognition superpower. The defining characteristic of the INFJ mind is introverted intuition operating at extraordinary capacity. But what exactly is happening neurologically when an INFJ makes one of those seemingly impossible intuitive leaps that leaves people asking, how did you know that? The answer is both simpler and more complex than most people realize. The INFJ brain has essentially developed an advanced prediction machine through years of observing human behavior, studying psychology implicitly through lived experience, and accumulating pattern recognition across thousands of social interactions. When an INFJ enters a new situation, their brain doesn't start from scratch. It immediately begins pattern matching against everything it has observed before. Consider this scenario. An INFJ walks into a professional meeting and within the first 5 minutes knows something is wrong, even though everyone is acting polite and professional. What's actually happening neurologically is this. The INFJ's brain has registered the subtle incongruence between what people are saying and how they're saying it. They've noticed the slightly strained quality in someone's voice, a frequency shift their auditory processing detected. They've observed body posture micro changes that signal discomfort or tension. They've registered the slight delay in someone's response time when asked a particular question. Most importantly, they've connected all these tiny data points to similar patterns they've observed in past situations involving workplace conflict, power struggles, or interpersonal tension. Their brain didn't consciously process each of these elements. That's the crucial part. The pattern recognition happened automatically beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. By the time the INFJ's conscious mind becomes aware that something is off, their brain has already completed extensive analysis and reached a conclusion. This is why INFJs often struggle to explain how they know what they know. They're not being evasive or mysterious. They literally cannot articulate the logical steps their brain took to reach the conclusion because the process happened in neural regions they don't have conscious access to. This phenomenon is actually documented in cognitive science literature. Neuroscientists have found that the human brain can process and respond to patterns that the conscious mind never becomes explicitly aware of. For personality types like INFJs, whose dominant function is introverted intuition, this unconscious pattern processing is highly developed and efficient. Their brains have essentially built sophisticated statistical models of human behavior and psychology through experience, and these models run continuously in the background, updating themselves as new information comes in. What's particularly remarkable about this system is its predictive accuracy. INFJs aren't just identifying patterns in what's happening right now. They're projecting forward, imagining how the current situation will unfold based on how similar situations have unfolded before. An INFJ might sense that a relationship won't work out months before any obvious problems emerge. They're not making this up or being overly pessimistic. Their brain has recognized patterns that suggest incompatibility or problems down the line. They're experiencing a genuine prediction based on deep pattern analysis, not irrational fear. This predictive capacity is so central to the INFJ experience that it actually shapes how they move through the world. They're constantly playing scenarios forward, imagining multiple possible futures, and trying to steer toward the most positive outcome while avoiding pitfalls they can foresee. This is exhausting cognitive work happening constantly in the background, which explains why INFJs often feel drained after social interaction or complex situations. 3. The paradox of INFJ logic. Why feelers can think like engineers. Here's where the common understanding of INFJs breaks down completely. People hear feeling type and assume this means INFJs are driven by emotion, that they prioritize feelings over facts, that they make decisions based on how they feel rather than what makes sense. This characterization fundamentally misrepresents how the INFJ mind actually works. The INFJ's extroverted thinking function is genuinely sophisticated and capable. When INFJs need to operate in analytical, logic-driven environments, they can do so with remarkable competence. The difference is that they approach logic from a different direction than their thinking-dominant counterparts. While a thinking type might build their analysis from the ground up, starting with facts and building toward conclusions, INFJs often have a conclusion already from their intuitive processing and then work backward to find the logical foundation for it. This creates an interesting cognitive dynamic. An INFJ might present an argument that sounds perfectly logical and well-reasoned, but the internal experience was actually one where they sensed the truth of something and then systematically built logical support for that intuitive insight. To external observers, it looks like pure reasoning. But internally, the INFJ knows they started with an intuitive pull and justified it logically. What makes this different from just confabulation or rationalization is that the INFJ's extroverted thinking actually does legitimate critical evaluation. If the logical foundation they build doesn't actually hold up under scrutiny, the tension between their intuition and their logic creates genuine internal conflict. An INFJ won't simply accept weak reasoning just because their intuition said something should be true. Their thinking function will call them out on it. This combination creates INFJs who are unusual. They're intuitive visionaries who also have rigorous analytical capacity. They can dream up innovative solutions while simultaneously being skeptical enough to identify fatal flaws in those solutions. They can advocate passionately for a position while acknowledging legitimate counterarguments and evidence against their position. This cognitive flexibility is what makes INFJs capable of sophisticated leadership and complex problem solving. However, this also means INFJs often struggle with what's sometimes called analysis paralysis. They'll come up with an intuitive insight, build logical support for it, then find counterarguments that their logic can't refute. They'll go back to their intuition to see if they miss something, then rebuild their logical framework. For INFJs, this iterative process between intuition and logic can continue indefinitely, creating a cycle where they're never quite certain they've reached the right conclusion. 4. The internal collision. When intuition and logic create neurological conflict. One of the most misunderstood aspects of INFJ experience is the internal tension that emerges when their intuitive and logical systems reach different conclusions. From an external perspective, this can look like indecision or emotional instability. In reality, it's a genuine neurocognitive disagreement that creates real psychological stress. Imagine this situation. An INFJ meets someone and their introverted intuition immediately signals that this person is emotionally unstable or potentially harmful, a genuine feeling that something is off, though they can't quite articulate why. Meanwhile, their extroverted thinking examines the evidence objectively. The person has never done anything wrong. They're kind, accomplished, and interesting. Logically, there's no rational basis for the INFJ's concern. What happens next is neurologically stressful. The INFJ's intuitive system is essentially saying, warning, threat detected. Proceed with caution. But their logical system is saying, I don't see any evidence of threat. This assessment seems invalid. The INFJ is now genuinely torn. Do they trust their intuition, which has served them well countless times before? Or do they trust their logic and give the person a fair chance despite their internal alarms? What makes this worse is that INFJs often feel invalidated when they try to explain this internal conflict to others. They'll say, something just doesn't feel right, and hear responses like, that's not fair to judge them without evidence, or you're being paranoid. But the INFJ isn't being unfair or paranoid. They're experiencing genuine pattern recognition that they can't consciously articulate. This conflict is one of the reasons INFJs often overthink decisions and second-guess themselves. They're not just thinking one thought and reaching a conclusion. They're cycling through multiple frameworks, intuitive, logical, values-based, and trying to reach alignment between them. Until all three systems are pointing in the same direction, the INFJ remains in a state of tension. Interestingly, when an INFJ has an experience that proves their intuition correct, when the person they were wary of does indeed turn out to be problematic, Their confidence in their intuitive system strengthens. They also feel somewhat vindicated, though often they won't say, "I told you so," because their value system, introverted feeling, finds that socially inappropriate. Instead, they'll simply note internally that their pattern recognition was accurate and use that information to strengthen their predictive model for the future. 5. Speed, accuracy, and the instantaneous reading of social space. One of the most striking abilities INFJs demonstrate is their capacity to enter a social environment and understand its dynamics with remarkable speed and accuracy. A skilled INFJ can walk into a party and within 30 minutes understand who has power, who's seeking approval, where the tensions exist, and what the underlying social structure is. This happens almost automatically without the INFJ necessarily trying to understand these dynamics. What's neurologically fascinating about this capacity is the speed at which it operates. The INFJ isn't consciously thinking, "Let me analyze who has power here." Instead, their brain is automatically processing dozens of variables simultaneously. Who initiates conversations, who defers to whom, whose opinions seem to carry weight, whose contributions get interrupted, whose body language relaxes or tenses around particular people, and what topics generate engagement versus discomfort. The INFJ brain is simultaneously running facial recognition analysis, tone of voice analysis, behavioral pattern analysis, and historical context analysis. They're essentially running a complex social simulation in real time. Their brain is comparing the current situation against hundreds of previous social situations they've observed and participated in, looking for matches or relevant information that might predict how things will unfold. This rapid processing is possible because the INFJ brain has essentially developed what could be called social and psychological expertise through extensive observation and study. Even INFJs who don't consciously study psychology are functioning as amateur psychologists. They're continuously gathering data about how people work, what motivates them, what threatens them, and what they need. The accuracy of this rapid reading varies depending on several factors. If the INFJ has previous experience with similar dynamics or similar types of people, their accuracy increases substantially. If they're in unfamiliar territory with people very different from those they've encountered before, their accuracy decreases but remains generally above chance level. The remarkable thing is that even when they're wrong, their error pattern often contains useful information about what they were pattern matching against. This rapid reading ability is one of the reasons INFJs often end up in roles involving people: counseling, coaching, management, mediation. They naturally understand group dynamics and individual psychology in ways that don't require conscious effort to acquire. They're working with what amounts to an expert system that's been built through years or decades of observation. However, this same ability creates a challenge. The INFJ can feel isolated by what they see. They understand the hidden dynamics, the unstated motivations, the underlying tensions that others aren't consciously aware of. They can feel like they're watching a play unfold where everyone else is acting a role while they alone see the machinery behind the performance. This can create a sense of separation from others, a feeling of being outside normal social experience. 6. Processing overload, the cognitive toll of hyperawareness. The flip side of the INFJ's remarkable perceptiveness is that their awareness rarely takes a break. The pattern recognition system keeps running. The emotional sensing keeps operating. The predictive modeling keeps updating. This continuous cognitive processing, while extraordinarily valuable in many contexts, extracts a genuine cost on the INFJ's mental and physical health. Consider what an INFJ's brain is actually processing in a single social gathering. They're monitoring the emotional state of multiple people simultaneously. They're tracking conversational dynamics. They're noting inconsistencies between what people say and how they say it. They're anticipating future developments in conversations. They're managing their own emotional responses to what they're perceiving. They're filtering which insights to share and which to keep private. They're considering the impact of their words before speaking. They're observing the impact of their words after speaking. They're tracking how the room's emotional temperature is changing moment to moment. This is an extraordinary amount of active processing happening in a finite cognitive system. The human brain, despite its remarkable capabilities, has limited attentional and processing resources. When those resources are being consumed by continuous monitoring and analysis, they're not available for other functions. This is one reason many INFJs experience what feels like social exhaustion that goes beyond typical introvert tiredness. The phenomenon is sometimes described as emotional labor, but that term undersells what's actually happening. It's not just emotional. It's cognitive, sensory, intuitive, and processing intensive. The INFJ's nervous system is in a heightened state of alert during social interaction. Their sympathetic nervous system is engaged in a way that it isn't for many other personality types. They're essentially running a marathon while others are taking a casual walk, and they're expected to pretend they're just strolling along. This processing overload can lead to what some researchers call cognitive fatigue, or what INFJs themselves describe as brain fog. After extended social interaction or particularly complex interpersonal situations, the INFJ's cognitive resources are depleted. Simple decisions become difficult. Memory recall becomes harder. Emotional regulation becomes more challenging. Their usual perceptiveness becomes dulled because they simply don't have the neural resources to maintain it. This is why solitude is not optional for INFJs. It's essential maintenance. Alone time isn't a preference or a luxury. It's a genuine neurocognitive necessity. During solitude, the INFJ's nervous system can shift from sympathetic activation to parasympathetic activation. The pattern recognition system can slow down. The continuous monitoring can ease off. The brain can process and consolidate all the information it has gathered. This is why many INFJs describe solitude as restorative rather than lonely. What complicates this further is that INFJs often feel guilty about needing this time. They're aware that they can seem aloof or unfriendly when they retreat. They understand that people might interpret their need for solitude as rejection. So they often push themselves to remain engaged longer than is neurologically sustainable, which then leads to burnout or emotional exhaustion. Learning to honor their processing and recovery needs without guilt is a crucial skill for INFJ well-being. 7. The architecture of perfectionism, where judgment and intuition intersect. The INFJ's judgment preference, combined with their intuitive capacity to envision ideal outcomes, creates a powerful but often problematic perfectionism. This isn't the perfectionism that comes from simple high standards. This is perfectionism rooted in the INFJ's ability to see what's possible and their natural drive to make things conform to that vision of possibility. When an INFJ looks at a situation, they're simultaneously seeing what is and what could be. They can envision the trajectory a person could follow if they made different choices. They can imagine how a system could be restructured to function more effectively. They can see the potential in circumstances that others view as fixed. This visionary capacity is a genuine strength, but also creates constant tension with reality. The problem emerges because the gap between what is and what could be is often substantial. The INFJ sees clearly how much better things could be, how much unnecessary suffering is happening due to inefficiency or poor choices, how much unrealized potential exists. This awareness creates a driving motivation to close the gap, to make what is aligned with what could be. But people and systems are resistant to change. People cling to familiar patterns even when those patterns hurt them. Systems perpetuate dysfunction through inertia and accumulated limitations. The INFJ, encountering this resistance repeatedly, begins to internalize the message that they're somehow failing. They're seeing the path to improvement so clearly. So why isn't everyone just following it? This leads to self-criticism. The INFJ blames themselves for not communicating clearly enough, not explaining well enough, not being persuasive enough. In reality, the resistance they encounter is normal human and systemic behavior, not evidence of their failure. This perfectionism also manifests in the INFJ's relationship with their own performance. They judge themselves against their own internal ideals, which are often unrealistically high. An INFJ might deliver a presentation that objectively goes well, but feel it was inadequate because it fell short of their internal ideal. They might maintain a relationship that's objectively good by most standards, but experience it as failing because they had envisioned something even better. What's particularly challenging about INFJ perfectionism is that it's not easily soothed by external validation. If someone tells an INFJ they did a good job when the INFJ is aware they fell short of their ideal, that feedback doesn't resolve the INFJ's internal assessment. The INFJ's internal standard remains the reference point, and external feedback often feels like misunderstanding rather than reassurance. Learning to differentiate between what's genuinely improvable and what's a function of human limitation requires INFJs to develop wisdom about which battles are worth fighting. They need to learn that perfect is often the enemy of good, that incremental improvement is still improvement, and that their visions of ideal outcomes serve as direction rather than destination. Conclusion: the integrated mind, truth beyond the stereotype. The INFJ brain, when fully understood, reveals something remarkable about human cognitive diversity. It's not a brain that's either intuitive or logical, emotional or rational, visionary or grounded. It's a brain that's all of these simultaneously, a system operating multiple processing streams in parallel, constantly negotiating between different types of information and different ways of knowing. What makes the INFJ neurologically distinctive isn't that they have abilities other humans lack. Rather, it's that they have particular abilities developed to notable refinement and a distinctive integration of different cognitive capacities. Many humans possess empathy, but INFJs possess unusually refined empathic perception. Many humans can recognize patterns, but INFJs have developed pattern recognition to exceptional precision. Many humans can think logically, but INFJs apply logical thinking in service of intuitive insights in a way that creates distinctive analytical capabilities. The challenges INFJs face, the perfectionism, the empathic overwhelm, the internal conflict between intuition and logic, are not signs of dysfunction. They're natural consequences of operating a system that processes information in such sophisticated and multifaceted ways. The solution isn't to change the system, but to understand it, work with its strengths, and develop practices that honor its needs. Understanding the INFJ brain matters for INFJs themselves, who could develop self-compassion when they recognize that their struggles are neurocognitive realities rather than personal failings. It matters for people in relationships with INFJs who can better understand why their INFJ partners or friends operate as they do. And it matters for society broadly, because INFJs contribute distinctive perspectives and capabilities that emerge precisely from how their brains are wired. When you encounter an INFJ who seems to understand you better than you understand yourself, who sees possibilities you haven't considered, who feels your suffering with genuine resonance, who maintains ethical clarity despite complexity, and who somehow manages to be both deeply analytical and deeply intuitive, you're not encountering magic. You're encountering a human being whose neurocognitive architecture processes reality in a distinctively sophisticated and multifaceted way. That's not mystical, but it is genuinely remarkable, and it's worth understanding, appreciating, and honoring for the unique contribution it represents to human cognitive diversity and potential.